We begin in the Gemara in Sukkah on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top. Lishna Achrina. So, we had before a statement from Rav Yehud in the name of Shmuel on Daf Yud Amud Bey, speaking about a person that sleeps inside a bed that's called a kila, has sort of a net surrounding it, and he's sort of like in a different tent, not actually inside the Sukkah. But Rav Yehud Shmuel said you could sleep inside this kila as long as it's not 10 tvachim high. There was a discussion about it in the Gemara. Here the Gemara brings another version of what Rav Yehuda Shmuel said, which was different. Another version said it as follows. Rav Yehuda Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, you're allowed to sleep in this kind of a bed, a kila that's made specially for chasanim. B'sukkah, inside a sukkah. And the reason is because it has no tefach of a top of a roof. In other words, it's made in a V-shape that finishes off on the top, similar to what we learned before when it's made naklite amita, that only has 2 poles without a tefach of a roof. Therefore, in this version he says, afal pi shegvoya asara. That's allowed even if it's high 10 tefachim because it doesn't have a tefach of a roof. Meisvei. So, and this was asked, Hayashim bekila b'sukkah layotzi dechevasa. In the Bryce it says, if you sleep in a kila inside a sukkah, you're not yaitza. So how does Shmuel say that you're yaitza sleeping in a kila's chasanim? So the Gemara answers, this Bryce is not talking about a kila's chasanim that ends up in the roof without a tefach. This is talking about a regular kila that has a gag and it's 10 tefachim high, so therefore you're not yaitza. Tashema. Another question on Shmuel, it says in the Braisa, which was quoted before, Naklitin Shnayim. Naklitin is when you have 2 poles holding up a sheet above a bed. Kenaifis arba. Kenaifis is when you have 4 poles on a bed. Piris lagabi kenaifis psula. So if you hang on top of the 4 poles surrounding a bed, a sheet to cover it, so then it's puzzle. It's like an oil for itself. Al-gabi naklitin, but on top of naklitin, which are only 2 poles, ksheira, then it's kosher. And the Braisa adds, the naklitin are only kosher if it doesn't have the height of 10 tvachim. So now, the Gemara says, but if the naklitin, which are 2 poles you're hanging a sheet above it, would be high 10 tvachim, psula, then it would be puzzle. Even though naklitin are 2 poles and it finishes up V-shaped on the top where there's no tefach, and still it's puzzle. So we should say the same thing regarding a kilas chsanim, even though it doesn't have a tefach of a roof, but if it has the height of 10 tefachim, it should be puzzle. So this is the question on Shmuel. So the Gemara answers, naklitin is not exactly the same thing as a kilas chsanim. Shani naklitin the kvi. Naklitin are different because it's affixed in the bed with these 2 poles, and therefore it's something more permanent. So if it has the height of 10 tefachim, it'll be puzzle. Frek the Gemara, kvi. If it's affixed and that's the reason why it's an issue, so then lahavik kinaifis. Let it be the same halacha like kinaifis when there are 4 poles. What did it say in the Gemara before? We learned yesterday in the Gemara, it said by kinaifis that because it's affixed in the bed, so therefore even less than 10 tfachim, it's considered to be a oil for itself and it's puzzle. So if that's the issue with the naklitin, that it's kvi, it should be the same like kinaifis. So the Gemara says, lagabi kinaifis like kvi. Depends on what we're contrasting it to. If we're comparing the naklitin to the kinaifis, so it's not the same. It's less permanent than the kinaifis, which has 4 poles, and therefore it's more permanent to have this cover and it's an oil for itself. So therefore over here, by naklitin, if it's less than 10 tfachim, it's not going to be a psol. Legabe kila kfi. But then comparing it to the kila of the chsanim, this is more permanent. It has these 2 poles, and therefore if it's going to have if it's going to have the height of 10 tfachim, regarding the kila, again, legabi the naklitin that is. Legabi the naklitin, if it's going to have the height of 10 tfachim, then it's going to be puzzle. Okay, so therefore it depends. Basically the Gemara is saying that there are 3 different scenarios, three different levels. And the kinaifits, which are completely permanent, then the naklitin, which are less permanent than that, and the kila, which is even less permanent, and therefore the kila, even if it's 10 tvachim high, it's mutter to sleep in a kilas chsanim. Darash Rabbe Baravona darshan then said, mutter lishim bekila, you could sleep inside a kila, afa pisha yesh lagag. even if it does have a tefach of a roof. In other words, a regular kila, not a kilas chsanim, and va'afal pi shigvoya asara. Even if the height of this canopy, of this net that's over the bed, is 10 tacham high. Still, it's allowed. It's not an issue of sleeping inside an oil that's in a sukkah and you're not inside the sukkah. Come on, according to whose opinion did he say this? Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Lo yasi oil arai umevatel oil keva. An oil which is only temporary cannot come and annul the more permanent oil that you're really in, which is the sukkah. So since this kila is inside the sukkah, which is a permanent structure, so therefore it's not mevatel that oil keva. Where did Rabbi Yehuda say this? It's not Rabbi Yehuda said in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, our custom was lishan tachas amita, that we slept inside the sukkah under a bed bifnei hazekanim, in front of the zekanim. So Rabbi Yehuda allows us to sleep under the bed, even though he's under a bed and it's sort of an oil for itself. But because sleeping under a bed is not a permanent oil, it's inside the sukkah, which is a permanent structure. So therefore, it's not an issue. Frek to Gemara, if that's what Rabbi Baravuna was saying, so why didn't he just clearly and directly say that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? So the Gemara answers, if you would have said the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, so then I would say, Hani milimita. That's only true in that case when he sleeps under a bed. The lagaba asuya. It's made to sleep on the bed. And here he's sleeping under the bed. Under the bed, it's not even considered to be an oil altogether. As Rashi explains it, not only is it not an oil kavua, it's not even an oil arai. It's not even made to sleep under the bed. So therefore over there, he's inside the sukkah. Aval kilo de l'toicha asuya, a kilo that's made to sleep inside of it. And he's using the kilo for its intended use. So therefore maybe I would say maloi. Maybe this is different because it is an oil. It's an oil arai, but it is an oil. Maybe that's still an issue in an oil kavua. So therefore there's no raya from what Rabbi Yehuda said. Kamash Malan, therefore Rabbi Baravuna said is halacha regarding the kila, and he's teaching me the time of the Rabbi Yehuda, the reason of what Rabbi Yehuda said, that you can sleep under the bed, that a temporary oil will not come to annul the fact that he's in a permanent oil. And therefore, loishna mita v'loishna kila. Makes no difference if this is in a kila or under a bed. The reason why under a bed it's okay is because it's an oil arai. And therefore we could apply the same thing to a kila, which is also an oil arai. Zokte Mishneh hidla oleo as a gefen. If he pulled up and on top of the sukkah from the vine, vesadalas, or from a pumpkin, vesakisais, or the ivy that grows on walls, he pulled it up onto the sukkah. Vesichach al gaba, and he placed the schach on top of the sukkah, or on top of these branches that he put on top of the sukkah. From the simple lashon of the Mishnah, the Rishayim HaMedayik, it's mashma, that was speaking of here in a case that he first put the pasul schach, and then he put the kosher schach. Then the Mishnah says, psula, it's going to be pasul. So if it would be in the reverse, if you put first the kosher schach and then the pasul schach, it would be kosher. But other Rishayim say that no, there's no difference. Whether it makes no difference what you put first, the order, the kosher schach, the pasul schach, either way, it would be pasul. And they actually divide the Mishnah into two. Hidla les agefen v'sadalas v'sakises. That's one case, which means that there was already kosher schach, and then on the kosher schach, you put the pasul schach. And then there's another case, v'sichech al gabon, you go to gabon, and then in another case is that there was first the pasul schach, and then on the pasul schach, you put the kosher schach. Either way, it's pasul. If the kosher schach is a lot more than the pasul schach, or he cut it off, then ksheira, then it'll be kosher. So as Rashi explains, when it says in the Mishnah katzitzon, that means even after you put on the schach, and even though b'shas you were putting on the schach, it was again katzitzon. He put on this pasul schach because it's mechuber, it's attached to the ground, and the schach that's attached to the ground is pasul, as Rashi here brings the source. P'soila is gairin v'yekev. It's only after you detach it from the ground. So while he was putting on the schach on the sukkah, it was pasul schach, and he just cut it from the ground. It's going to be kosher, even though he doesn't move it from its place. And that's what it seems from the simple pshat of the Mishnah. Cuts it on, it'll be ksheira. Just to remind you what we learned before regarding what it says, that it's going to be kosher. that the case is b'shechavtam when the pasal is chach and the kosher is chach are mixed together, and because the kosher is chach is much more than the pasal is chach, this is bittul beroiv, and therefore it's going to be kosher. Sagt the Mishnah weiter, zeh klal. This zeh klal is actually a new halacha. So here's another halacha regarding the kashrus of schach. Kol shu mikabel tumah, any material that's mikabel tumah. So if it's a beged, or if it's something that's made into a keli, these things are makabel tumah. Ve'en gedulim in aretz, or if it's something that doesn't grow from the ground. Ein mesachachem ba, you can't use it for schach. V'chol davar she'ein makabel tumah, something that is not contract tumah, gedulim in aretz, or it grows, and that it grows from the ground. Mesachachem ba, that could be used for schach. So the Gemara starts here with the first halacha regarding the case where you had schach, which was mechuber, and you put it on the sukkah, and then you just snipped it, you cut it from the ground, and it says it's going to be kosher. So Yosef Rav Yosef kamei de Rav Huna v'Yosef kama. He sat in front of Rav Huna and he said as follows: Oishe kotzetzon ksheira. This halacha that it says in the Mishnah that if you just cut this schach that was possible, it'll be kosher. V'amarav, and Rav said about this tzorech lenaneya. You're going to have to move it. You have to move this schach. Now, the exact extent of what moving the schach means, so in Rashi it's mashma that you just move it, you lift it up and put it back down in its place. Other Rishonim bring, from I think in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, that nanua means that you have to move it over a little bit, move it from its place where it's in. In other words, as Rashi explains, what's this Gemara based on and the whole rest of the sugya, most of what we're going to learn today? This is the halacha of Chag HaSukkos Tasalach, and we learn out from Tasa v'loi mina osu. When you're making the sukkah, when you're putting the schach on the sukkah, this refers specifically to the schach, so you have to do the action of placing kosher schach on the sukkah. If you put the schach, and when you do the action, it's not creating the sukkah, it's because it's pasal schach, and then later it automatically becomes kosher without you doing any action, so then it's osu. It just happened on its own. So that's pasal. That's really the issue over here with this pasal schach that was mechuber. So now, therefore, Rav is saying, even though you're cutting the schach, cutting it is not significant enough of an action that it should be tasa. So now, you would think, in order for it to be tasa, this pasal schach, you have to completely remove it, then you detach it from the ground, and you put it back on. So the chiddush of Rav is, as Rashi explains, you don't have to completely remove it and put it back on. As long as you menaneya, you lift it up, or you move it a little and you put it back down, that's considered to be tasa. It's significant enough of an action that you built the sukkah and therefore it's going to be kosher. That's the chiddush of what Rav is saying here. Amalei Rav Huna said to Rav Yosef, Ha Shmuel Amra. This statement, Shmuel said so. Adrinu Rav Yosef la pei. Rav Yosef turned away his face from Rav Huna. In other words, he didn't agree to what he was saying. Vamalei, and he said to him, Atu mika minelacha delei Amra Shmuel. Did I say that Shmuel did not say this? Amra Rav, v'Amra Shmuel. I said that Rav said so, and could be Shmuel also said so. Both Rav and Shmuel require to move this schach because of the issue of Tasa v'lei ben Asi. Amalei Rav Huna, so Rav Huna explained what he meant to say to Rav Yosef. Hachi kaminalach, this is what I was telling you. The Shmuel Amra, not only Shmuel requires this, v'loi Rav, and Rav does not require to shake it to move it. The Rav achshuri machsh, Rav would say that in such a case it's kosher. Rav holds, if you put on pasal schach and then you cut it from the ground, that action of cutting it qualifies for tasa. That is tasa. Just that little action is enough. So according to Rav, you don't need this. And the Gemara brings the source. Kiha de Rav Amram Chasida, like an incident that happened with Rav Amram Chasida regarding tzitzis. So Ramet Chilte Lefarzume, he placed the tchelas of the tzitzis into the four-cornered garment, the inchi beise, of the women of his house. So as Rashi says, his opinion was that the women are also chayiv in tzitzis. He doesn't hold of the drasha, that ksus laila, that a garment worn at night is possible from tzitzis, so it's not a mitzvah sasesha as man grome, so women are chayiv in tzitzis. So he put on the tzitzis, and what he did was, v'loi pasak roshe chutn shalehen. So, Talon, he hanged these strings on the corners, and what he did is he took one long string, folded it into four, and hung it on the corner, and made all the knots and everything that has to be done with the tzitzis, and he did not cut them yet to be four separate strings. Okay, so now, what does he do? So b'shas he was hanging it, and b'shas he made all the knots, it was not kosher chutin, it was not yet cut. After it's all done, after he did the action with pasal chutin, now he wants to know, could he go ahead and cut it? So he came to Rav Chia Barashi and asked him about this. Amalei, so he said to him, Hochiyom Rav. This is what Rav said. Mefaskon ven ksherin. You could just cut them and it'll be kosher. In other words, even though the action that you did, b'shas you were putting it on and tying it onto the beged, that's worthless because then it was pasul. But just the fact that later you're going to cut it, that's enough. If so, we see that we could say the same exact thing by the sukkah. You put on the schach that's pasul mechuber onto the sukkah, then later you cut it. The cutting it itself is tas, that's going to be kosher. So therefore he was telling him that it's not a problem here. Just cutting these strings that he folded over, that's the asiyah, that's the tasa. Here by sukkah as well, cutting it, that's the asiyah, and therefore, according to Rav, you don't have to be minaneya the schach that you cut that were mechuber. Fragt the Gemara, v'sava Shmuel, does Shmuel hold lo yamrinim psikasan zui asiyasan? Shmuel holds that we do not say so. That if you put on the one long string into the tzitzis and he folded it over and then he wants to cut it later, does Shmuel not hold it if you cut it later, it's okay? Because Vatani Shmuel, what we learned that Shmuel said, Mishum Rav Chia, in the name of Rav Chia, you placed one long string into two corners, or maybe actually four strings, but you put them into two corners together, which is also a problem. Because as we'll see soon in the Gemara, it says, Hakonof psil tcheles. Each string has to be placed into one corner, not two corners together. So you put it in a puzzle away, two together. And then after you put it into both corners together, only then did you cut it into two separate strings that it should be for both corners. Sheinin, it's kosher. So my love, so the Gemara now explains, so don't you think, when did Shmuel say that this would be kosher? Shekaisher. Not only did he put this one string into both corners, but he put them into both corners and he tied them into both corners with all the knots. And then now he goes and cuts it to make it kosher. And that action that you do after everything, and it was everything you did was done with pasal tzitzis, and then you come to cut it, that cutting alone is okay. So what do you see from here? That Shmuel agrees to Rav as well, that just cutting it is fine. So the Gemara says, Loi, that's not what Shmuel was speaking about. Shapaisik v'achakach kaisha. He did place the threads, the string of the tzitzis in two corners together, but he didn't tie it yet. First he cut it, and then he ties it. So the tying it, that's a significant tasa, to tie it to the corners. That was done after he already cut it. So therefore over there, it's not a problem. Again, loy shepaisik v'achakach kaisher. So the Gemara says, paisik v'achakach kaisher, if that's the case, that he cut it before he tied it, so, what's the chiddush of what Shmuel is saying over here? To say that this would be kosher. I mean, obviously, the kshira, that's the action of putting in the tzitzis, to tie the tzitzis to the corners. So if you already cut it before, what should be the problem? What's the chiddush? So the Gemara explains, the chiddush is as follows. I would think to say, just a moment, sorry about that. I would think to say, Be'inon konof b'shas psil v'leke. That I would think that this point, that you have to have a thread for each corner separately. That's the limit. Konof, not kanfais. You can't put the same thread for two corners. So I would think that requirement as well has to be b'shas psil at the time when you put it in. When you're putting it in, put it into each corner separately. And therefore, if you put it into two together and you cut it afterwards, that should also be an issue. Kamash Malon, the lek, and over here, you put it into two corners together. Kamash Malon, that's the chiddush over here. As long as you cut it afterwards, and now each corner has separate strings, it's fine. It doesn't have to be separate strings as you're putting it in. It has to be separate when you're doing the kshira. So you should have an action, a tasa, that's a kosher tasa, but not putting it into each corner separately. Meisvei, a question was asked on Rav's opinion. It says in the Braisa, Tolon, v'loi posak rosh echut shelahen. If you put the tzitzis into the corners and you did not cut them. In other words, you took one long string, you folded it over, put it into one corner, and you tied it, and you did not cut it yet. It's going to be possible. My love, what do you think this means? Psulin la'olam. Don't you think it means that it's going to be possible forever? Even if you're going to cut it afterwards, it's too late. The action of putting it in and tying it was already done. Yetiyufta the Rav, this refutes Rav's opinion that says you can cut it afterwards. Amalach Rav, so Rav answers, my psulin. What is the meaning of psulin in this brayse? Psulin, sheyifseku. It's possible until you'll cut it. Once you cut it, it's going to be kosher. Shmuel Lama, but Shmuel interprets the pshat in this brayse according to his opinion. Psulin li'olam. It's going to be possible forever because it's tasav alayim asi. Cutting it later is not a significant action. V'chein Amar Levi. Levi says the same as well. Psulin li'olam, that it's possible forever. V'chein Amar Rav Masna, Amar Shmuel. Rav Masna said in the name of Shmuel, Psulin li'olam, it'll be possible forever. Ikadamri, others say, Rav Masna didn't simply repeat it in the name of Shmuel, but Amar Rav Masna said, Bididi ava ovde. This is actually something that occurred with me. That I put it in, and I tied it, and I didn't cut it yet. Vasila kameid Amar Shmuel, and I came to Shmuel, V'amali, and he told me, Pasal oilam. It's going to be pasal forever. You can't just cut it now, it's going to be pasal. Meisvei, the Gemara asks another question on Rav. Tolon, it says in the Braise, Tolon, he puts the tzitzis, one long string, folded over into a corner. And va'achakach pasak roshi chutn shalem. And then he snips it to make it into 4 different strings. Psulin, it's going to be possible. He cut it too late. So over here it says clearly that it's too late to cut it at this point. Can't say like we said before that once you cut it, it's fine. So this is a clear question on Rav. Another question is, we learned in the Braisa regarding Sukkah, the source of this whole concept. The Torah says you have to do the action, and you're doing the action with the materials while it's kosher, and not that it just happens on its own automatically. From here we learn out that if a person brought up the vine on the sukkah, or the pumpkin, the branch, or from this ivy onto the sukkah, and then he put kosher ischach there as well, psula, it's possible, because it's tasev aloim and asi. While he put it onto the sukkah, it was possible. So what is this Braisa speaking about? Is this Braisa speaking about that he put on this pasal ischach, what's mechuber, and he'd never cut it? So the Ma'ir Yimishum Tasav Aloim and Asi. Why is the Braisa saying that the issue is because it's Tasav Aloim and Asi? Typically the mechubaran, over there the issue should be that it's mechuber, that it's attached to the ground, not because of Tasav Aloim and Asi. The case in this Braisa is that he did cut the mechuber, and yet the katani psula. That's exactly what the Braisa is saying, that even though you cut it, it's not enough. It's tasav aloim and asi. Cutting is not a significant action, and therefore it's just like it becomes kosher on its own without you doing an action, so therefore it's possible. So this is a question on Rav. We see here that we don't say that cutting it is the action that makes it kosher. This refutes Rav. So Rav will answer you. In this Braisa, you know what the case is? The shalfinu shlufi. That he did pull it out of the ground, but he left it in the same position where these branches were when they were attached to the ground. So therefore, it doesn't look like it's detached. It looks like it's still attached to the ground, so it's marasayin. That's the iloi minkera asiyah they do. You don't see the action that was done, that it was detached from the ground. So it's really only possible with the Rabbanan. So, as Taisus points out, according to this pshat, the way Rashi explains it, so even though the Braisa brings the pasuk, tasav aleim and also, it doesn't mean that it's possible here min ha-Torah. It's only possible with the Rabbanan, based on the concept of tasav aleim and also, they possible in this case where it's a marasayin. That's Rashi's pshat. Taisus says another pshat, shalfinu shalufi, means that he didn't fully detach it from the ground. It's still a little bit attached to the ground, and therefore it's not going to be kosher. Okay, so therefore this is not enough of an asiyah. The issue is not really the mechuber, because it's mostly detached, so it's not mechuber anymore, but it's not a full asiyah. So therefore even Rav would agree that this is still a problem. That's Taisus' pshat. Mikol Moket. But the Gemara goes back now to the first question that we asked here, that we had a clear Braisa that said, Tolon v'achakach pasak kashil Rav. It said clearly by tzitzis, that if you put on the tzitzis, you folded it all over and you put it on and it was all one long string, and then you cut it afterwards, it's too late, it's not a significant action. Kasha, so it's a question on Rav, Kasha. That remains a question. Shall we say that this machlokes over here between Rav and Shmuel Kitanoi? This is a machlokes Tanoim, and the Gemara is going to bring another case regarding Hadassim. Ova velikton. So this is talking about Hadassim that sort of have these berries that grow on the Hadassim, and if the halach is, as Rashi here brings, if there are more berries on the Hadas branch than the leaves of the Hadassim, then it's possible. It's menumer, it's not Hadar, it's not beautiful Hadas, and therefore it's possible. And the halacha is you're not allowed to remove them on Yontif, because you're fixing it, you're preparing it, you're making it roi for the mitzvah, it's not allowed to be done on Yontif. However, Avar Velikton, if he was over and he did remove these berries of the Hadasim on Yontif, Pasul, it's still going to be Pasul. Divrei Rab Shimon bar Yitzadek. That's Rab Shimon bar Yitzadek's opinion. Chachamim machshirin. Chachamim say if you remove them, even on Yontif, it's going to be kosher. So now what's the explanation of their machlokes? So Savrua, they thought to say that the explanation is as follows. The Kula Alma, everybody agrees, Luliv tzarech eged. That a lulav, you don't just cut it off the ground and you just take the 4 minim and you hold it in your hand and you don't have to do anything else. No, the lulav, the 4 minim have to be tied together. There's an eget, the 3 minim actually, not the esrik, but the 3 minim have to be tied together. So there's an action that has to be done here. So if there's an action that has to be done, that action has to be done with kosher minim. The action that's done with pasal minim, the action is insignificant. So we're going to go back to the issue of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'aseh. You're doing an action while it's pasal, so the action is like it wasn't done at all. So everybody else, lulav tzarech eged. The lulav and the hadasim and the aravis has to be tied together to be yaitze the mitzvah. That's number one. Number two, everybody holds v'yalfina and lulav misukah. Everybody holds that we compare lulav to sukkah. Same requirement of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'aseh. And the level of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'aseh that's required by the sukkah is the same by lulav. T'chsev gabi sukkah ta'aseh v'lo min ha'aseh. So now, if so, what's the explanation of this machlokes? So my lab b'hakam miflagi. So don't you think they're arguing about this very subject that we spoke about before? The man the machsher, the one that says that if you picked off the berries, it's going to be kosher. Savariol zamrinon gabi sukkah tzitzasan zui asiyasan. By a sukkah, you put on the mechuber on the schach and you just cut it off. That's a significant action for it to be kosher, like Rav said. So the gabi lulav nami. So we said the same thing by the lulav, or here by the hadasim. Amrinan likitasam zuya siyasan. Removing the berries from the hadasim will make it kosher. Even though while you were doing the action to make it roi for the mitzvah, tying it, it was being done with a pasala hadas. So your action then was insignificant. But the fact that you take off the berries later, that's enough. Cutting it off is good enough that it should be kosher. We learn it out from Sukkah. Man the pasul, and the one that says that it's still going to be pasul, savari holds, lo yamrin gabi sukkah ktzisasan zui asiyasan. By sukkah, just cutting it off the ground is not a significant action. So therefore we say by lulav the same thing. The gabi lulav nami lo yamrin likitasan zui asiyasan. Removing the berries from this hadas is not significant enough to make it kosher. While you did the main action of tying it together, it was pasul. So therefore you don't have an asiyah here. That's the source. So we can say that this concept is a machlokes tanoim. So the Gemara gives a few suggestions to say no, they're arguing about something else. Loi, no. The Kula Alma, everybody agrees. Loi amrinan gabi sukkah tzitzasan zui asiyasan. By sukkah, just cutting it off is not significant enough of an action, like Shmuel's opinion. And v'hacha, the argument over here is b'meilef lulav misukkah kamiflagi. Do we learn out that the level of asiyah that's demanded regarding sukkah, do we apply the same level of asiyah regarding lulav as well? Man the machsher sava lo yalfinu lulav misukkah. The one that says it's kosher says we don't learn out lulav from sukkah. By sukkah it says tasa has to be a significant action. Cutting it is not enough. But by lulav we don't learn that out. You need the eged, and if you don't have the eged, you have a different action. You can just cut off the berries. Uman the pasul savar yalfina on lulav misukkah. And the one that says that it's pasul says that I learn out tasa from sukkah, and you have to have a significant action over here as well. Just cutting off the berries is not good enough. That's the machlokes. So they're not arguing by sukkah. They're arguing by lulav, whether you learn out lulav from sukkah. Vi by same another pshat is vidalon lulav tzarech eged. If we would hold that lulav actually needs this action done to be machsher, to tie it all together, so then kula amalei pligi. Nobody would argue the alfinon lulav misukkah, that we learn out lulav from sukkah, and just like by sukkah, you require a real significant action and not just cutting it off the ground. Over here as well, cutting off the berries would not be good enough. So that everybody would agree. Again, like Shmuel. But over here the argument is as follows. Mar savat tzarech eged. The opinion that says that you can't just cut off the berries holds that you actually need this action of tying it, so therefore that's the action necessary that it should be done while it's kosher. Umar savarein tzarech eged. And the one that says that it's kosher says that the lulav and the hadas and the aravis do not have to be tied together b'chlal. There's no such action required. And therefore, there's no issue of ta'aseh v'lo min ha'aseh here. That whole thing is not an issue b'chlal. And therefore, you can cut off the berries later. Ubeplukte the Hani Tanoim. And they're arguing the machlokes of the following Tanoim. They're arguing about whether the lulav and the adasim and the aravas have to be tied together. Tanya we learned in the Braisa. One opinion is the Tanakama says lulav bein agud, bein shein agud, kosher. A lulav, whether it's tied together with the adasim aravas or not, it's going to be kosher. Rabbi Yehuda says agud kosher. If it's tied together, it's kosher. She'ein agud, if it's not tied together, pasul. Then it's going to be pasul. See here, you have this machlokes whether the lulav and the lulav and the three minim have to be tied together. So the Gemara now brings the source. My time of the Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say that there's a din of eged that you have to tie the three minim together? Yalef lekiche na'agudas eizav. We learn out the terminology of the pasuk here. It says lekiche v'lekachtem from the lekachtem that it says by the agudas eizav. Ksiv it says over there in the pasuk. This is by the Korban Pesach. Ulekachtem agudas eizav. You should take an agudas eizav. You tie together this eizav grass. Ksiv hacha. Here the Torah says ulekachtem lechem b'yom harishon. So therefore we learn out mala alam baguda, just like there it says agudas, you tie it together. Av kanami baguda, so to over here it's tied together. The Rabbanon lekichem lekicha lo yalfino. The Rabbanon don't hold of this gzeira shava, they don't learn out this lekicha. So therefore it does not have to be tied together. That's the source of the machlokes. The Gemara now brings another braisa. Kamana az lahad Tanya, according to whose opinion does the following braisa go? So it says lulav mitzvah la'oigdai. Now lulav, there's a mitzvah to tie it together with adasim and aravas. Even if you didn't tie it, it'll still be kosher. So the question is, according to who is this? Rabbi Yehuda, if it would be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, why does it say that if he does not tie it, it's kosher? Rabbi Yehuda requires the tying it together. We learn it out from a good that says that it must be done. And if it's according to the Rabbanon, amai mitzvah. Why is there any mitzvah to tie it together? What would be the source for this? So the Gemara says, la'olam rabbanani. In truth, this is the opinion of the Rabbanon. And the reason why we have to tie it together is because of zeh keli vanveyu, to beautify the mitzvah. When you have the adas and the arav, the lulav separately, so it's scattered around, it's not held nicely tied together beautifully, it's not such a beautiful cheftza of a mitzvah. So hasna l'fan of a mitzvah is beautify yourself in front of the Eibusher with these mitzvahs to have a nice mitzvah. That's the mitzvah of zeh keli vanveyu, therefore it says mitzvah. But it's not required with the yavid, if you didn't, you yaitza the mitzvah. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, Zeh klal, kol davish mekabel tumah, anything that's mekabel tumah is not kosher for schach. You know, and immediately from where do we learn this? Amar Reish Lakish says, Amakra, the pasuk says, the eid yale min haaretz, the cloud rises from the ground. So therefore we see that the cloud comes from the ground. So it's sort of gidula, it goes up from the ground. And also it's not mekabel tumah, as the Gemara now says. So ma eid davish ein mekabel tumah. A cloud is not makabel tumah. It's not food. It's not a keli. It's not. As Rashi says, it's not makabel tumah. Gduli menaret, and it goes up from the ground. Av sukkah, so too the schach for the sukkah is davar she'ein makabel tumah. Has to be from materials that's not makabel tumah. The gduli menaret, and it comes up from the ground, grows from the ground. That's the source. So what's the connection to a cloud? So as Rashi says, because the sukkah is all to come to commemorate Ananei HaKavod, the cloud that Yidden sat in. So therefore we learn out from a cloud what kind of a sukkah commemorating that cloud we have to sit in. But now that the Gemara asks, this is a good source according to the opinion that says that the sukkah comes to commemorate the fact that Yidden sat in Ananei HaKavod in the midbar. But according to the opinion that says that when Yidden were in the midbar, they literally sat in sukkahs to shield them from the sun and so on. So if so, sukkah again, sukkahs mamish asolahem. Literally, sukkahs is what was made for them. So then, what can we say? There's no connection to a cloud. Why would we learn that from a cloud? So the Gemara brings a source of this machlokes. The Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, it says, Ki bar sukkahs, hoishafti es b'nei Yisrael. In sukkahs, the Eibusher placed the Yidden. So the first opinion is Ananei HaKavod. This is Ananei HaKavod. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says, sukkahs mamish asolem. That this is literally sukkahs, this is huts that the Yidden were in, the sukkahs in the midbar, not Ananei HaKavod. So this answer we gave before, learning from a cloud, is only according to Rabbi Eliezer. So Hanich Rabbi Eliezer, El Rabbi Akiva, Maya Kalamema. What's the answer? So the Gemara brings a different source. Ki Yasser Avdim Yom Rabbi Yechanan, Makra, the pasuk says, Chag HaSukkahs Ta'asalach. So what do we learn out from Chag HaSukkahs Ta'asalach? It says Chag and it says Sukkahs. Makir Sukkah lechagiga. We compare the requirement of the schach for the sukkah to a chagiga, carbon chagiga. Dava ma chagiga dava she'en mekabel tumah. Just like the carbon chagiga is an animal, a live animal is not mekabel tumah. Ve'gidulim min haaretz, and it grows from the ground. Rashi says what that means is that it gets food and its sustenance is from what it eats from the ground. Av sukkah dava she'en mekabel tumah ve'gidulim min haaretz. So too the schach of the sukkah has to be from something that's not mekabel tumah and it grows from the ground. So the Gemara asks, if that's the case, you're learning it out from the carbon chagiga, ima chagiga balechayim of sukkah nami balechayim. If so, you should say that just like a chagiga is brought from a live animal, so too sukkah, the schach of a sukkah should be able to be from a live animal. You could put live animals on top of the roof of your sukkah and that would be kosher, and that's certainly not the case. So you can't be learning out from chagiga. So the Gemara refutes this. So as Rashi points out at the bottom of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, that according to what the Gemara says now, that it refutes this source, behemoths are not considered to be gidulim min haaretz. Yes, they feed from the ground, so in that sense it's gidulim min haaretz, and regarding meiser it's considered to be gidulim min haaretz. But regarding other things, we see clearly that gidulim min haaretz only means something that literally grows from the ground, not animals that feed off the ground. So this is not the source. The Gemara is going to bring another source, as we'll see the continuation in Mitzvah Shem and Daf Yud Beis.